The Giants have made several additions this offseason, including most recently Jorge Soler, and that should become official soon. But is there a case to be made that of the remaining top free agents, the Giants should just simply pass and maybe take advantage instead of next year's free agent class? I'll answer with my strong opinion next.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily San Francisco Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Giants, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. My name is Ben Kaspick, and on the show we provide daily episodes Monday through Friday, talking about the San Francisco Giants in a way that's data-driven and rational, but also simple, passionate, and accessible to all. I'm a former contributor for the baseball statistics and analysis websites Beyond the Box Score and Rotographs. I've been podcasting about the Giants since 2015, coming up on 5 years of hosting Locked On Giants, and I'm a lifelong fan. Thank you for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube, so check us out there if you have not already. And please hit that subscribe button wherever it is that you're following the show. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. And coming up on today's show, as promised, we are gonna get to some mailbag questions, and I kind of left y'all hanging. Was not able to do an episode yesterday. I apologize about that. Something came up, and your team every day except yesterday for me. But this was a question in the last episode we said we were going to get to first in the mailbag. So jumping right in, Aiden says, is there a case for getting a utility infielder and nothing else of note? Leave as much salary space for next offseason where pickings will be more bountiful. And so we kind of started to answer this question in the last episode at the very end. And what I did was I went through and looked at the free agent class next offseason. And indeed, I mean, there's some big names out there. Juan Soto, Pete Alonso, Christian Walker, Gleyber Torres, Willy Adames, Ha-Seong Kim, Alex Bregman. And then on the pitching side, Zach Wheeler, although there's talks of an extension possibility there. Corbin Burns, Shane Bieber, Walker Buehler, guys like that. And also, it's worth noting that this question was asked before the Giants made their signing of Jorge Soler, or before it was reported that they are in agreement with Jorge Soler. That deal is not yet official. It is pending a physical. I'm never not going to point that out, as we all know why. But to me, there's a case to not go crazy and tie yourself down with. That's the thing. All these guys who are in the 100-ish plus $1 million tier that are remaining, and there's still 4, and they're all Scott Boras clients: Blake Snell, Matt Chapman, Cody Bellinger, and Jordan Montgomery. They all have their kind of red flags. I'm not saying they're not worth $100+ million, but they all have their red flags. And so there is a case to make that you could possibly decide to just not go there. And that's very much a possibility. I mean, I'm not promising that any one of these guys ends up on the Giants, but at the same time, I just think each individual season is important enough. And especially considering the way the last many seasons have gone outside of 2021. We're talking about one playoff appearance in the last 7 seasons. From 2017 through 2023, one time in the playoffs, and it was a first round bounce. And so if you just I think with this, and this question was before their reported deal with Jorge Soler, and I strongly felt the answer was no at the time, and I still strongly feel like the answer is no, except, it does require kind of looking at their commitments and looking at their future obligations. And right now, with Soler in the fold, they've committed about $98 million for 2025. And that assumes that Robbie Ray opts in to a $25 million salary in 2025, which is not a guarantee. So if he opts out, then subtract $25 million from that, and you're down to like $73 million. And so that's nothing. And $98 million, it's not nothing. And so if you add, call it a Blake Snell for close to $30 million a year, suddenly you're already committing, $130 million to next year's payroll. And not just next year, but then you look down the line and it gets less and less as years go on. But nevertheless, I mean, you just thinking about next year alone, it depends on what they're willing to spend overall on payroll. And they've kind of consistently been right about where they've ended up now, which is in the 160 something million dollar range. Last year it was 196 million according to Roster Resource, but they received $30 million in cash essentially when MLB sold its remaining stake in BAMTech to Disney for $900 million and divvied it up evenly to all 30 teams. And so there's a clear trend. And so if they don't spend any more, then this whole break even thing, it seems that, breaking even means about 160 something million in payroll. And if you receive an extra 30 million, it means 190 something million, which they did last year. And so we'll see what they do, and that'll tell us a lot. But they still have room to go this offseason before hitting the luxury tax threshold, the first threshold, which is 237 million. There are penalties for exceeding it that are not just financial. If you give someone a qualifying offer and they end up signing elsewhere, you get lesser compensation. And if you sign a player like Soto, like Corbin Burns, who will receive a qualifying offer, then there are harsher penalties for doing so if you're a team that is a luxury taxpayer. And so I do think they want to avoid going over that number, but maybe they make an exception. Maybe they're not. Maybe you just make the exception now and just go over it one time and then get back under it and kind of make this year the year where you capitalize and sign a Matt Chapman and sign a Blake Snell, go over the luxury tax, but then dip back under it next year, but then have those guys locked up long term. So there is a case to make. Like, I understand what you're saying, but I just think each season is too valuable, and that this fan base is understandably not going to be patient enough. Like, I'm not patient enough. I do not want to sit here and talk about a team that is not good again. I want them to be as good as they can right now. I think it's been long enough of kind of waiting for impact. And these players are imperfect. I think like a Blake Snell, just the upside is too much for me to pass up. He has as much upside as any of those other pitchers on the list. He won the Cy Young Award in the National League this past season. I have more questions about some of the other guys, but Snell would be such a good fit. Chapman defensively, so yeah, no. For me, no, the answer is no, and you cannot rely. That's the other thing. It's not like, okay, let's punt on 2024 so we can go get Soto, and then you throw the bag at Soto, and he's like, no, I'll take a deal from, I don't want to say the Dodgers, because I actually don't think that's likely given all their commitments that they've made to some guys. But like the Yankees, just like the Aaron Judge situation all over again, for example, you just can't bank on it. And so for that reason, no. Coming up in just a minute, more questions and answers. We're going to get into what is a realistic benchmark for a positive season for the Giants in 2024. And before we get into it, today's episode is brought to you by our good friends over at Game Time. You shouldn't have to worry when you buy tickets to your next big event. That's the whole thing, is that these big events that you're going to, whether it's a baseball game, a basketball game, the theater, a concert, it's supposed to be a fun experience. So why is the ticket buying experience historically been such a stressful one? Well, enter Game Time and all that stress is relieved. It has been for me. I'm planning to, go to some road games this year to watch the Giants. And with Game Time, when I'm buying those tickets, I get images of seat views. The whole idea for me is going to stadiums I've never been to before. And therefore, I'm not familiar. And so when I'm buying those tickets, being able to see what is the view like from that seat is a real game changer. And also, you don't know when's the best time to buy, like what's the pricing like. So you get the Game Time guarantee as well, which means if you find tickets in the same section and row for less, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, as promised, we are going to get into more questions and answers. Thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. Everydayers tomorrow. We got a bunch of updates with pitchers and catchers reporting yesterday. We got some medical updates, but nothing like major enough that it was going to trump the mailbag episode that we had planned. But I imagine today there will be more news and notes coming out. Tomorrow, per Susan Slusser, Jorge Soler is going to take his physical, so maybe that becomes official tomorrow. And so, there's a lot going on, and we'll have that for you tomorrow. Locked On, by the way, in case you didn't know yet, has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV in the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app. All right, as promised, like I said, we're going to get to more mailbag questions. This one coming from Bill, who says, at this point, and again, this was pre-Jorge Soler, but I'm going to just update it. I'm just letting you know, Bill asked this before they reportedly signed Jorge Soler. At this point, what would be a realistic benchmark for a positive season? And so my brain is already playing tricks on me where I want to say, well, if this and this and this happens, but they still don't make the playoffs, that could still be considered a positive. But to me, it's 100% you've got to be above 500 and you've got to make the playoffs for it to be a positive season. The exception I'm trying to kind of make, and it would not be like a positive season, but you can still have positives in the season if you don't make the playoffs. But if a lot of young players have good seasons, like Kyle Harrison, say Marco Luciano establishes himself, it would hard to be like, oh, this season was all bad if things like that happened. But a realistic benchmark for a positive season, I'll say at least 86 wins and honestly a playoff series win at least. I'm not one to sit here and say I'll be happy with a postseason exit. I'm never happy unless my team wins the World Series. At the end of the day, it's a disappointment if you don't win the World Series every single year. That's my mindset. But I understand that you're not going to every year. And hopefully everybody understands that. But, getting back into the postseason on a foundation of sustainability, with some young players really stepping up and looking like foundational pieces, and then winning a postseason series for the first time since, the wild card game in 2016, if that even counts as a series. It would be the World Series win back in 2014, 10 years ago, in terms of a real series. And so that's crazy. And so just win a series, win a postseason series. Again, I'm not saying there and then I'll be happy when they lose in the NLCS or they're probably, if they go to the playoffs, they're probably going as a wild card team. And so that's just a best of 3. But nonetheless, it would be a series. So 86 plus wins is the start. That's where I'm hoping. All right. Jard, I maybe wrote that wrong. Jard wrote, what, if anything, gives you confidence about this front office's ability to win? I mean, first of all, they set a franchise record for wins in 2021 with 107, but I understand the question. The last 2 years, an 81 win season and then a 79 win season. I don't think anyone should really count 2019 as like a reflection of this front office. They were just kind of dealing with the roster that they were given that was already too expensive for this ownership's liking. And so they didn't make like significant additions. And so that their record is more reflective of the previous front office in 2019. So don't let anyone kind of count that season as a knock against this front office, in my opinion. 2020, they vastly improved, kind of collapsed in the last week and missed the playoffs in that 60-game season. But what I'll say is, what, if anything, gives me confidence is the ability to find undervalued talent. And I just think they need to do a better job of basically either developing or signing impact talent. But like, they got Tyro Estrada for cash. They got Lamont Wade Jr. for Sean Anderson, if anyone even remembers Sean Anderson. They got Mike Yastrzemski for Tyler Erb. They got Alex Dickerson, who was good for a minute, for Franklin Van Herp. And on and on. And then we're starting to see some of the fruits of their drafts, like Patrick Bailey and Kyle Harrison, for example. And those are a couple of then there's more on the way. Like Bryce Eldridge, who they just drafted this last draft, is showing up on top 100 lists already. Carson Wisenhunt was kind of climbing the ranks before an elbow injury slowed him down, but he's healthy again now. The development of Logan Webb. But like finding a Lamont Wade and a Mike Yastrzemski and a Tyro Estrada, no, none of those players are like star players, but their ability to they're like the anti-Angels, where they have a really good ability to like have a lot of depth and to not have anyone truly bad anywhere on the field. I mean, at times there have been some exceptions to that, but for the most part, they're better than most at that depth. And then of course, like you've got your Kevin Gosmans and Carlos Rodons and stuff like that, where they found that talent, but they didn't lock it up. Like definitely in hindsight, look back and say, oh, we should have given Kevin Gosman the deal that the Blue Jays gave him. But at the same time, you look at Carlos Rodon, and it's like it's easy to say in hindsight when you look at what Gosman has done, but then you look at Rodon and you see what's happened to him, and he had a horrible year and he was injured a lot. And so that there you see the inherent risk when you do give those long-term deals to pitchers. And so I don't know. I mean, it's easy to make these calls in hindsight, but if they were to have added Carlos Correa or Aaron Judge or Shohei Ohtani or Yoshinobu Yamamoto, which they did pretty much everything they could do to do so. And with Correa, he agreed. He said yes. He signed, docu-signed or whatever it is that he did, where he was committed. Then you take that floor of nobody's bad and you add star talent to it, and I think then you start to just kind of take off. And so they either have to develop it or they have to sign it. And that's why I say go out and get a Blake Snell. You're getting one of the best pitchers in the game if you do. And you add him to already one of the best pitchers in the game in Logan Webb. And suddenly this team jumps up pretty fast because there's no like serious holes. People say there's like holes on the roster. I don't really see the holes on the roster. I see like competence everywhere. depends on, like, if you're talking backup infielder, then maybe there is a hole there. But if you're talking like Luciano, like, is that really a hole? A top prospect like Marco Luciano, and then JD Davis, like, is that really a hole? Wilmer Flores, a hole. Lamont Wade, a hole. Michael Conforto, Jung-Hoo Lee, Mike Yastrzemski, Austin Slater, Patrick Bailey, Tom Murphy. The rotation options like beyond Logan Webb and Jordan Hicks, like Keaton Wynn and Tristan Beck, and guys like that. Kyle Harrison, like, are those holes, or are they just kind of unproven in a way, for some of those guys? But for the most part, like, there's just a whole lot of solid, but not enough spectacular. And so that's what gives me confidence, is all you need. You're not far off. You're not far off. Like, what put the Giants over the edge was like Buster Posey and Tim Lincecum, right? A couple of draft picks that just panned out, and they nailed those picks, for example. So I think that's what they're missing. And it's not just like, it's one thing to be like, our whole organization stinks. Like, we've got players all over the field who stink, but that's not the case for the Giants. It's just there's not enough Buster Posey, Tim Lincecum impact talent on the roster. But hey, maybe Kyle Harrison becomes that along with Logan Webb, and maybe Marco Luciano or Luis Matos or Patrick Bailey just kind of takes that next step, or maybe they go out and sign somebody or trade for somebody. So that's what gives me the confidence. So coming up in just a minute, is this a 500 team as currently constructed? Like, exactly 500, below, above? What are my thoughts on that? We will get into it momentarily. And before we do, today's episode is brought to you by our good friends over at, you guessed it, none other than FanDuel. Get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your team wins. Now, I know the Warriors, I believe they had a disappointing kind of loss recently, but I'm looking at the upcoming game for the Warriors against the Jazz, and the Warriors are favorites at the Utah Jazz at -122. That game, tonight at 8:30 Eastern, so 5:30 Pacific. The spread at -2, the over-under at 240.5. And so again, at FanDuel.com/lockedon, you place a $5 bet. Any winning $5 bet gets $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. You can bet on all your favorite NBA players and teams with quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot. FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NBA. All right, here we go. We're going to get to more questions and answers. Thanks again for making Locked on Giants your first listen every day. Everydayers tomorrow, the latest from spring training. We got a bunch of notes yesterday. We'll have some more notes trickling through today, and we'll give you the updates there. Injury update, on Alex Cobb, how he's progressing. Reggie Crawford, Giants' first-round pick a couple years ago. Some really interesting news there. And some other guys as well. Latest on Joey Bart, possibly the official announcement of Jorge Soler. So a lot coming at you tomorrow. So the next question comes from Matt in Maine, who says, with how the roster is currently constructed, do you think this is a 500 team? If the Giants get some key free agent acquisitions, how many more wins will it give the Giants with the current roster? And so, again, this question was asked before they signed or agreed to terms with Jorge Soler pending a physical. And I think that, like, on paper, it is, like, I'm not exactly sure what you mean by this question. Do you mean, like, are they even able to win 81 games? Or do you mean, like, do I think they're, like, a 500 team? So I think that's what you mean, is like, are they a 500 team? And I think I'm kind of leaning towards yes, but also with the caveat that in baseball, there's huge kind of error bars with each season. And so if you're a team kind of projected at 81 wins, you could easily win 90, you could easily lose 90. And so I think that the Giants, with that floor of I think their floor is pretty high and their ceiling is pretty low. And so I think that their error bars are probably smaller, where they're more likely to end up as currently constructed with the addition of Soler, or like maybe plus or minus 5 wins of that 81 win projection ish, right? And so when you say, I think the most interesting part of this question is, if the Giants get some key free agent acquisitions, how many more wins will it give them with the current roster? And so that's when I look to a Blake Snell and I look at, like, okay, what are the projections for Blake Snell, right? And so just glancing them over, you've got Zips projecting about 4 wins above replacement for Blake Snell over 170 innings, which would be, he often doesn't pitch that many innings. You've got the Bat projecting 2.5, and I'm going by runs allowed per 9 WAR, not FIP-based WAR, which is what Fangraphs typically uses. ATC, another projection system for Snell, at 3.5 wins above replacement. Steamer at 3.6. So that's not to say, okay, so yeah, and the average there being around, say, 3.5. That's not to say you just add 3.5 wins. You add 3.5 wins minus whoever's roster spot he would be taking. And so on the depth chart, it's kind of like Tristan Beck as a starting pitcher is kind of whose roster spot you'd be taking. So if Beck would have given you, like, I don't know, 1 win above replacement or something, projections have him kind of roughly there, to be honest, then you're talking like 2.5 wins, perhaps. It's not quite that simple. You've got to see what are they projecting innings-wise for a Tristan Beck, et cetera, et cetera. And plus, this, WAR is not precise and all that. But let's just say over what they have, probably 2.5-ish win upgrade for Blake Snell. So if you're an 81 win team, you become 83.5 win team. And then for Matt Chapman, again, you have to look at who are they taking over for? And if it's JD Davis, what is the projection for JD Davis versus what is the projection for Matt Chapman? And so this ATC, before I even look at these guys' projections, ATC just kind of averages all of the projections. And, it's only 2.8 for Chapman, wins above replacement. But we've got we've got a wide range here. Like Zips says 3.7, the Bat X, which is kind of one of my favorites. They rely on a lot of StatCast data, 3.5. Versus JD Davis, the ATC projection is 1.4 wins above replacement. So Chapman literally doubled that in the ATC for himself, and Zips and the Bat X have Chapman like worth about 3 extra wins over 2 to 3. So again, another 2.5 or so wins, let's call it. And so maybe by adding those 2 guys, you're adding 5 wins, and there you go from 81 to like 86. Okay, and not only that, but then Davis perhaps moves down the chain and becomes like a bench piece for you, and suddenly your bench is also better, and he's replacing somebody who was worse on your bench, and so it can have a ripple effect like that. So in conclusion, like if you go out and sign 2 of the top, if you get a pitcher and a hitter out of this top 4 remaining group, and then you put yourself into that like 86 win projection range, you're like right up there with all the teams that aren't the Dodgers and the Braves. I mean, you're right up there, like you're like third-ish best in the National League if you have an 86 win projection, with a bunch of teams kind of lumped together in that like 70 78 to like 83, 84 win projection range. But if you can leapfrog everybody and put yourself a step above that, that's why I say no, don't take this offseason off. Go out and be aggressive, and we'll see what they do. Spring training is here, but these guys are unsigned, so we'll see what they do. Anyway, that is all the time we have for today. Thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. Every dayers, like I said, the latest from spring training, all the news and notes, some fascinating injury updates, some fascinating updates on some two-way players in the Giants organization, and abandoning that idea for a certain player in particular. So we will get into all of that tomorrow. Locked On, as I said earlier, has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV in the free Fire TV Channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today, now available on the free Fire TV Channels app. Once again, my name is Ben Kaspick. Check me out on Twitter at Ben Kaspick, Kaspick. If you like this show, please consider rating it or leaving a review. It helps me out so much, so thank you in advance, and thanks to everyone who's done so already. I cannot wait to be with you again tomorrow. Thanks again for listening today. You are now Locked On Giants.